So if you're new to learning about, most things Australian politics, if you're new to learning about Australia's immigration problem, Australia's housing crisis problem, the March for Australia, all that sort of stuff, then this is definitely going to be a video for you. Hold out for all of it. I'm going to run through some pretty interesting findings. I'm no expert on this, so I'm kind of relying heavily on the research I'm doing at the moment, but I'm pulling it all together. That way I can, sort of talk about it and, basically see what's going on in Australia regarding the big hype around, migration policies, housing policies and stuff like that. So if this sounds like you, if you're on the same boat as me, watch this because this is going to be a very, very interesting video for you, and pay close attention. So what I did is generally when I start learning about a new topic, I generally go to ChatGPT just to sort of get a broad understanding around what I'm after. And then I look through the references that ChatGPT sometimes gives me. And then I basically go from there. And then it's sort of like that sort of research begins to sort of, gain momentum through that. And so this is what I'm doing here. And I'm very, very interested in how you find out the information that you've been looking into, because going through this, it was actually quite not shocking, but it's very, very interesting. So follow me along here. Let me know what you think throughout the video at each of the steps, because I think this is a really, really good take of what's going on at the moment. So here we go. So only using the data so this is what I put into ChatGPT, right? I said only using data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, give me a 2-plot graph, one plot showing time versus number of dwellings in Australia in the time frame from the year 2000 to now. And for the second plot, show me time versus the number of net overseas migration numbers. So the word they're using is NOM, net overseas migration, which basically means what's the net number of migrants that have moved into Australia, and that takes into account how many's moved in and how many's moved out. Okay, so it's just like a net figure. And basically from what I know is the contention point around Australia's migration issue, and that everyone's sort of kicking up about, is that we're just letting too many people in every year after year after year, and that eventually escalates. So this plot here, can I big screen that? Yeah, so this plot here. Now, we see here at the top one, number of dwellings. So you can see this is in the magnitude of, that would be 10 million, 12 million, 14 million. I'm pretty sure that's right. So net overseas migration, number of dwellings. So as the years go on from year 2000 to 2025, you can it kind of looks pretty, well, that's pretty linear, right? And then the net overseas migration, you can kind of see it go up and down and down. This is COVID. This is the GFC here. Says, big drop here, big drop here. And this sort of ramping up here is what I believe was from, I think this is like during the the Howard government. And I think they started to bring in some new policies around skilled migration and foreign investing, I think. So I think that's sort of what's been going on there. And then now we've got this huge spike, and this is kind of what people are screaming about. Okay. So from this graph here, it's kind of evident that there is sort of some alarming sort of things going on here. And you'll hear the Labor government currently, they're kind of saying that basically all these people that left is going to have some sort of kickback coming up. So if COVID didn't happen, you probably would have seen this kind of do the exact same thing. But Australia is looking like a better place to live after COVID. So I think this is what kind of hits this target here. Okay, so here's the 2-plot graph, top plot, blah, 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 blah. Cool. Okay, yes, overlay them and also explain why the dwelling number is so linear. Because when I saw like this linear number, I was like, I didn't think that the number of houses would be very perfectly linear. Initially I thought with Australia's like sort of housing crisis kind of thing, I thought there was going to be a little bit of a taper, but it looks rather linear. So I sort of asked what was the go there. And it came back and said, why the dwelling curve looks so linear, steady population growth. Australia's population growth has grown consistently for decades, and housing construction generally scales to meet long-term demand. Housing stock accumulation. Once built, dwellings usually remain in the stock for decades, even if construction fluctuates year to year. Policy and economic cycles dampen short-term slowdowns, only create small dips, but building approvals, blah, blah, blah. ABS reporting style. The dwelling count is an aggregate stock figure because it represents the total million of homes, annual variations in new builds. So it can still vary like 150 to 200K a year, barely changing overall. So basically what this is saying that it's a linear line because the variations are just so slow that in perspective of like the total number, it doesn't really affect that much. I mean, yes, that's what we're saying here. It's 8 million, 10 million, 12 million, etc., etc. That's why you see such straight line. Would you like me to also add housing complete? Okay. So from there, then I said, okay, so please provide a similar graph, but show for Australia's total population too. So here's the overlay of the graph, green dash line. So the blue line here is now the total population, right? And so we know that Australia's population is roughly about 27 million. So there's that steady increase in line. This makes it, this makes clear that while population growth is smoothing and cumulative, the non-flows are volatile. They spike and dip depending on the policy changes. So what I wanted to sort of get from this was, did these sort of changes in net overseas migration really have an effect on the total population? And I just find it interesting here, right? If you kind of look very closely, this is a very, very steady growth. It's very linear, Australia's total population. And the net overseas migration has gone up, down, down, up, and it really has no overall effect on the total population. So I thought that was quite interesting. So I don't know what you think about that, if you think that's accurate, but you know, so far we're using everything from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Okay, so let's keep going. Can you add a graph showing how many dwellings Australia should have to meet the population demand overlaid on what it currently has? Now, this is, if you're listening, just follow along, okay? Because this is really, this bit here really kind of baffled me a little bit. So I'm trying to find out, do we have enough housing in Australia to support every single person in Australia? Now, before you jump into it, I know that, you know, multiple people live in different houses and you want to live in certain areas. I'm just curious about the total housing market, right? So to do this, we need to work out the required number of dwellings based on the population divided by average household size. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics household size has trended down from 2.7 in 2000 to 2.5 today. So that's saying that in the year 2000, there was an average of 2.7 people in a home, and now it's 2.5. And so that already means that there's already a shift in the number of housing, is that we're going to need more houses to support the same amount of people now versus in the year 2000 by a factor of 0.2. Our model, so overlay this demand curve with the actual ABS dwelling stock numbers. So let's have a look at this, right? So here we got actual versus required. So the dashed red, or the red line, required dwellings based on population. So this is saying that the number of dwellings in the year 2000 was 7 million, right? Yeah, 7 million. And so that's based on that 2.7 number. And here in the year 2000, we would only need an estimate of 1.08. So 10,800,000 homes or dwellings to support the total population of Australia. And then how many we actually have, oh my Lord, it is over, well, not over double, but like there is a large gap here to say basically we've been building more, according to this graph, we've been building more homes or more dwellings than what's actually needed. Now, I don't know about you, but that's quite interesting. I know, again, I'm not saying that like, because sometimes people don't want to live in the places where the homes are being built and those sort of things, but you got to admit this is basically saying that for the total population in Australia, everyone could be in a home if you took away basically where people want to live and that sort of stuff. Like we'll dive into that, so just hang on. But this is quite interesting, don't you think? Like, I think this is going to build a case, or it's an interesting statistic when we start talking about immigration. Okay, so here's the graph, right? So key insights: Australia's dwelling stock has closely tracked population needs, but only slightly above the requirement line. That small buffer means any delays in construction, surges in migration, or smaller household sizes, so people going from, so like we said before, in the year 2000, it was 2.7 average people, And then now 2025, it's 2.5. And that could also, if that trend, if that is a downwards trend, by another 25 years, we could be at like 2 people, just as a round figure. More people living alone can quickly create housing shortage. The housing crisis isn't that we have fewer homes than people need. It's that the margin is razor thin. So they're saying that this sort of line here is a little too close for comfort. Which when you look at that graph, it kind of looks like there's a lot. But yeah, I guess the difference here is only, what would you say that about 500,000, 0.6 million homes in the grand scheme of things. Like that's, it's quite a lot. Well, that's quite thin actually. So this shows that, so then my prompt is, this shows that the number of dwellings Australia has meets the population demand. Then why is it that Australia claims to have a housing crisis? Right? I think that's a pretty good question. When you look at the total dwellings versus population, Australia doesn't seem drastically short of homes. The problem is more nuanced. The housing crisis isn't just about the raw number of roofs, it's about distribution, affordability, and utilization. And this is where it gets really interesting. Okay, so just follow along here because this is going to get really, really good. So, location mismatch. People just don't need a house somewhere. They need one where the jobs, schools, and services are, like in your major cities. Dwelling growth has often been stronger in regional areas or outer suburbs, while demand concentrates in inner city and coastal markets. This creates localized shortages, driving up rents and prices, even if national total balances. Now, I 100% agree that, because I've sort of always lived, hang on, let me go back. At the moment, I live in a very dense area. Well, it's probably medium dense. I live in Gold Coast, where everybody has wanted to move to the Gold Coast over the last, since COVID sort of times. And Gold Coast just hasn't been, well, especially the southern end, it hasn't been developed to basically house a lot of people. So there is a lot more, well, the closer you get to the actual beach side, there's more houses and stuff like that rather than sky rises. But obviously that's starting to change and there's a lot more apartment units been brought up. But in terms of like, schools, in terms of like public transport and all those sort of things, it's kind of like housing is kind of taken a priority in terms of all of that. And then those things are sort of backed up. Same when you look at like Brisbane is a lot more apartments than that, but all the outer suburbs is where all the homes are being built. Same with Gold Coast. All the houses sort of being built further and further out, but they're focusing a bit more on, sky rises. And I'm sure it's exactly the same thing for like Sydney, Melbourne, all that. Like they are building homes, but they're building homes in the suburbs and that where people don't work, people don't go to universities and stuff like that in the regional areas. So this sort of, you can build a shitload of housing, but if it's not in the right area, they're not going to get, that's not really going to have that much of an effect on the actual affordability overall. And I think that's a very, very good point. And I think a lot of people sort of do touch on that and would agree with that. Okay. But this is going to be an interesting topic for later on. Let's keep going. So household size falling faster than expected. So we kind of spoke about this before. In the 1980s, it was 2.9, right? And now it's 2.5. Now I'd say maybe possibly younger generations are tending to, I think there is a trend that younger generations are unfortunately like families are breaking up more. So there's a lot more single parents, less kids, that sort of stuff. And, people I think as well are wanting to live by themselves. And so hear me out here. All right. Tell me if you agree or not. Like I would say most families live in suburbs, especially where I grew up, northern suburbs of Salisbury, Adelaide. We grew up on the suburbs, but then my university was in the city. And then my workplace was also in the city. So I moved out to get closer to the city because that's where I spent most of my time. And I think the newer generation, and a lot of my friends are like that too, we all sort of moved out towards the cities because universities was there, our jobs were there, nightlife was there, all that sort of stuff. And I think that overall is becoming like our generation. So the, anyone who's born in the 80s or 90s and, to current, I think people are trying to follow that trend where, I don't know, but from what I've heard, my parents and that sort of stuff, like they all sort of all stuck around the family home and it was a bit more that way. Tell me if you agree or not. But I think that would also feed into like that sort of those trends are falling into this as well. More people live alone, and couples have fewer children since spare bedrooms are common. This is going to be a good talking point later on. So even the population versus household, divided by household balance looked okay, but actual demand for separate dwellings is higher than the ABS long-term trend assumes. Underutilization of stock. Okay, so we're going to get a lot of people who sort of want to arc up about the bedroom tax, which I still don't know if it's going to go through or not, but let's have a look at this. Underutilization of stock. Many homes aren't fully used. Holiday houses left vacant. Older households staying in large family homes after kids move out. That's sort of what I was touched on before. Big houses in the suburbs for a lot of kids, and then we all sort of move close to where the action is, and then those houses stay in the family, and then you've got my mum had a 3-bedroom house and she was barely even home. So on like a 700-800 square meter bit of land. So, and everyone in the neighborhood was pretty much exactly the same because they were all my mates. Investors land banking properties or leaving them empty. Australian Bureau of Statistics 2021 consensus found 1 million dwellings were unoccupied on census night. Now, it doesn't mean that a lot of people just ignore that sort of stuff, but that's 1 million homes. So it's genuinely empty. Some were genuinely empty. I don't know about you, but when I first moved to Brisbane, there was I lived in these 3 towers, and 2 of them were completely empty. And my brother currently lives in a apartment block in Brisbane as well. Apartment block across from here is pretty empty. So there is this sort of stuff going on, and it's I think when people start talking about negative gearing, capital gains, and that sort of stuff, I think this is all building on those arguments, right? So underutilization of stock. I think this is also going to feed into something else we're going to touch on, all right? Number 4, affordability crisis and physical shortage. Even if enough dwellings exist, prices and rents have surged beyond what many can afford. Cheap credit, tax incentives, negative gearing, capital gains discount, and investor demand have inflated values faster than wages. So the crisis is partly economic accessibility, not just physical supply. What I'm gathering from all of this, and you can tell me if you agree, but I'm going to say, if I'd have to look at all of this and just base my argument just based on all this, it is purely economic accessibility and policy based. I actually don't think from this, I might learn later on that I'm wrong, but a physical shortage supply isn't the main issue, because it kind of looks like construction wise, they are still keeping up with that linear trend. It doesn't look like the net overseas migration impacts, that demand. So I think if we were to pay attention a bit more to, or put a lot more pressure on this sort of policy and accessibility standpoint, I think that would be a whole lot better for Australia's housing crisis. And I don't think that net overseas migration is that big of an issue. I shouldn't say that big of an issue, because I still think it is quite, I think there needs to be, the fact that we have 30% and every other country has 15% kind of says we might be doing things a little bit different. But I don't think it is the issue. Anyways, let me know what you think below. Let's keep going. Lag between demand shocks and supply response. The NOM surges, 500,000 people came into Australia in 2023. Immediately boosts rental demand, but it's okay. Even if supply eventually catches up. So I think my migrants sort of typically tend towards to go towards the rental stock, is my understanding. Okay, I don't think a migrant comes over here and then they just start buying houses or that sort of stuff. I think they come, they rent, and then they get set up in their job and that sort of stuff. I'm not one, so you can tell me if that's true or not. But I think they impact the rental stock the most, and I would say the rental stock is probably more at. I think it's a more, how do I say this? I think the rental stock is at more risk than the housing, like purchasing your first home. If I had to compare the two. So the housing crisis exists not because we lack enough homes in total, but because where they are, how they're used, and who can afford them. Okay, so the next talking point I said was, my response was, so would you say that the argument of building more homes is less of an issue than maybe looking at better policies regarding property utilisation is a better argument for Australia? ChatGPT says, yes, that's a very strong argument and it's locked by a lot of housing economists. Okay, so my sort of line of thinking here is, I think it's quite logical. Why just building more homes isn't the silver bullet? Supply lag, it takes 5-10 years. We sort of see, this red taping and blah, 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 blah. Geography mismatch. Extra dwellings are often built in places with lower demand, outer suburbs and regional areas, while the affordability crunch is in the inner city. Cost inflation, construction costs have surged, labor shortages, so building more is and more expensive. Global evidence. Countries like Canada, New Zealand, UK have also massively increased supply, but affordability has worse. So crapping on from this, I'm getting crapping on about building more homes, building more homes, building more homes, building more homes. It kind of sounds like it actually doesn't even have an effect on the housing affordability, which I think is a much, much bigger issue of what we're having. And I think my friends who are trying to get into the housing market are experiencing that hard. And I think a lot of Australians are very, very concerned about being able to buy into the market and also just affording rent in the cities that they want to be in for work, for friends, for social life, for, just trying to enjoy these years, university, that sort of stuff. So yeah, building more homes, probably not the silver bullet because it doesn't really affect, it's not a key driver of the affordability. Why utilization and policy reform may be more effective. Vacant dwellings, we kind of touched on this, 1 million were underutilized. They were empty. That's 1 million homes. That's insane. Like, what's the, let's have a look here. What's the population in Gold Coast? That's 500,000. Oh, sorry. Let's say 700K is probably a closer figure. What about Brisbane? 2.8 million, right? So that is almost a third of Brisbane were, according to this, empty. Now, I know this isn't saying that, these were all in Brisbane, but still, like when you think about that, 1 million were unoccupied. That's insane. That could have a huge effect on, the housing affordability if a lot of them, came into the market. Under occupancy, older Australians in 3-4 bedroom homes, single person households in large properties. If incentives existed to downsize or share, more homes could meet actual demand. Now, okay, if you've got a spare bedroom tax, all right, just you people just calm down for a sec. If you're triggered, just hold out. Because I do think, maybe not bedroom tax, okay? I think I'm going to talk about something like a little bit further on, but I do think there is some way to structure this such that it is more constructive and possibly better for the current situation that we have, right? But don't just hang on. Tax setting, negative gearing, capital gains discount, and land tax structures encourage holding property as an investment rather. So the union brought, trying to, introduce more negative gearing or more restrictions around negative gearing and capital gains discount. I think this is a really good idea for Australia in the current state that we're in. I think negative gearing, from what I understand, negative gearing to like maybe 1, max 2 investment properties. It should just be that. And then after that, you get no sort of incentives. Capital gains discounts, I think, also, looking at reducing the amount of discount you get from capital gains if you're a property investor and stuff like that. You should also, the government should look into amending those discounts. I think the fact that you can be like a multi-million dollar, like making multi-million dollars just in like rental income, maybe not just rental income, but the fact that you can make a living from investing in property, in residential property, oh man, I don't know. I think it just kind of doesn't sit with me right. It doesn't sit quite right because housing really is an essential need in this environment that we live in, right? So the fact that people are making money while other people are struggling, it kind of just doesn't sort of sit right with me. And I think the fact that one person can own 10 properties, yeah, it's good, but the fact that they're getting a lot of discounts and support for doing that, nah. Like if you can own 10 properties and you've been able to like effectively structure it in a way that, you know, you're in high growth areas, you've got higher yield, you've actually, you know, worked most of your loans down and stuff like that, so that way you're not negative gearing. Good on you. You've done awesome, like very well done. And there are renters out there, that people who rent that don't want to actually own a home. You're supporting them, supporting the immigration people who come in and or migrants that come in and they just want to rent, that sort of stuff. Like, good on you. But at the detriment of a lot of Australians not being able to even enter the market and driving up housing or impacting housing affordability as much as it is. And it's having a huge effect. I think that's dirty. And I think because it feeds into that, I then sort of think, well, now Australians are sort of attacking, I shouldn't use the word attacking, but now Australians have an issue with, you know, immigration. And then those people are sort of, you know, getting, you know, I don't want to use the word like racist and that sort of stuff, but like, I could imagine it kind of feels racist on their behalf if people are starting to attack, you know, them because they're migrants and stuff like that. Anyway, so I'm kind of rambling. But I think you can understand where my line of logic is not quite figured out yet, but we're getting there. Short-term rentals, Airbnb and simpler platforms remove thousands. Okay, man, Airbnbs have, I think, destroyed the rental market, especially here on the Gold Coast and in like Byron Bay, as they listed here. And I think in a lot of those other popular, like sort of northern city suburbs and stuff like that. Like, my Lord, like I think this alone has probably impacted so much. And I think if the government want to make quick changes, I think if you begin to regulate these a whole lot more to basically incentivize investors to not go down the path of Airbnb, but to rent or sell, it could solve a lot of issues. That might trigger a few people, but you tell me if you think that is a, you know, I think that is a good argument, and I think these Airbnb sort of, these short-term rentals it's taken quite a big hit. Migration coordination, a shock increase of net overseas migration without lining into housing construction creates demand stocked. Okay, yep. So the healthier framing is, yes, Australia must keep building. Okay, it has to keep building. Population's growing. But the crisis is less about total number of homes and more about how the existing homes are used, taxed, and distributed. Policy levers, vacancies, like the empty vacancies, downsizing incentives, tax reform, rental regulation, and migration planning could ease the pressure faster than... Okay, so this is... I agree with this, okay? We're not even done yet. We're going to get into more. So just keep holding out. I know this is a long one, but trust me, it is really... This is solving the housing crisis, okay? Just bear with me. So if I wanted to make a change in Australia today to improve the housing crisis we are in, what in order do you believe changes should be made from the list you provided above, and what should those changes be? Okay, so this is just saying, hey, ChatGPT. GPT Albo, all right? Prime Minister chat. He's the big chat, all right? He's the chat. In what process, if you were Prime Minister, if you were the government, if you were the holy of holiest, what would you do first? Okay. Big Chat says he would tackle vacant and underutilised dwellings. Immediate impact. Changes. Introduce a national vacant property tax, similar to what Vancouver or Melbourne experiment. Escalating homes are left empty for more than 6 months. So if you leave a home for more vacant for more than 6 months a year, boom, you get a tax. Okay. Now imagine if you have an Airbnb that's only, rented out 6 months of the year. This could, put some pressure on that. And obviously those property investors that actually benefit from the home being vacant rather than, tenanted, that would free up a lot of those homes. Tighten the rules on short-term rentals. Limit Airbnb stays to 90 days a year in high-demand cities, like Byron Bay did. Exempt genuine holiday homes in tourist towns. So if you live in tourist towns, exempt genuine holiday homes in tourist towns. Okay, so in touristy towns, that probably sounds like Gold Coast, for example. You can't have a holiday home. Oh, I think that would hurt some people. Imagine like Noosa. Would Noosa... maybe not, but it is a tourist town. anyways, this is talking about limiting Airbnbs, all right? And I think this could do wonders, okay? So this is what Prime Minister ChatGPT says. Offer downsizing incentives, reduce stamp duty, or boost super contributions for over 65s who sell large homes to move. Okay, so this is where I think the small bedroom tax, these are what the small bedroom tax, in my opinion, is trying to do. It is trying to get people who live in larger homes to basically move out or downsize. Now, I just think that the way they're going about it is it doesn't sit well with Australians, and Australians are really, really kicking off about it. I think you can get the same outcome with a better way of, dealing with the issue. And I think incentivizing retirees and that sort of, and like the older generation and stuff like that to downsize, if you incentivize them by like scrapping stamp duty or allowing them to put the profits they make on their property into their super tax-free or something like that, that would be, I think you would get a lot more movement. You probably wouldn't do it all at once. You'd probably break it out and that sort of stuff. But I think that would definitely free up some of the housing in the areas where people want to move into, especially like around where I live. Like there's a lot of houses and it's basically, especially like in Sunny Coast and stuff like that when I used to live in Sunny Coast, like it's a very older town or like older place. But I tried to actually buy in Sunny Coast, but I couldn't afford it. And, every single house inspection I was going to, open home, it was because someone had, like the grandparents had died, or they're moving out, like older people were downsizing, going to homes and stuff like that. But like it was all the older retirees and grandparents and stuff like that. So if you can, there's a lot of them there, and if you could incentivize them to downsize into like apartments or something like that, I think you could free up a lot of those really good homes for up and coming families. So I think that's really good. I think that could be structured in a really good way. And if the government could do it in a way where if they sold it and on the applications, they maybe prioritized first home owner buyers, you get better incentives or something like that. So that way you're not selling them directly to just property investors. I think that's a key. If you're selling that home, and let's say over time they do become cheaper, then property investors will come in and blah, blah, blah. But like if you could incentivize people selling to first homeowner buyers, or maybe like people who are just moving in general, I think you could, or owner occupied, let's say that, you could incentivize them that way. I think that's a much better way than going, hey, here's a bedroom tax. All right. If you agree with that, put it in the comments below, because I think that's a really good argument from my opinion anyway. I might be wrong. I might be missing something. Align migration with housing capacity, short to medium term. Calibrate the net overseas migration intake caps annually to match the housing completion. If only 180k homes are expected, don't admit 500 people. I think that's excellent, 500k. I think that it should be based on the previous years. And if government really do want to do something about, cutting red tape, getting construction costs, and they do want more net overseas migration to come to Australia, then it should reflect the construction output too. I think that's a really, really good. Prioritize regional migration settlement programs where housing supply is less constrained. Tie international student intake to verified. Yeah. So prioritize regional migration settlement programs. I think trying to get more people into regional areas, if you can incentivize migrants to move into those areas and maybe take on jobs there or something, okay? I think that could be beneficial too. Why second? So the big thing. Why is migration second? Migration is vital for the economy, but unmanned surges can create house. So I think what some people tend to forget with migration is, and I've said this before in a previous video, the good thing about migrants, high-skilled migrants, all right, this is what we're talking. We're not talking about just people that come in and splurge off the government, whatever. The high-skilled migrants, is they come here and they start paying taxes straight away. And they're high-skilled, so they're fitting a need that Australia needs in a certain area, and they start paying taxes straight away. They could possibly be paid more. They're probably in a high pay bracket because it's a needed job. Probably like engineering skills or health, in like health, like medicine and stuff like that. They're paying higher taxes. And I think that's in like all the visa applications, all that sort of stuff. I've seen it all. I've got a lot of migrant friends, and yeah, I can't believe how much they've had to pay for their visa applications. And then also going to uni, they have to pay it pretty much outright too. So like they pay a shitload of money, okay, and they come in effective. When you have a kid, they're not paying taxes until they're like start working at 16 or whatever, right? So they're pretty much just useless up until then. The potential's there, opportunity's there, but they're not really. They're just more of a burden, if anything. So I think it's a very good distinction between, or like it's a reasonable distinction between the two. So the good thing about migrants is they do come here, they do start paying taxes straight away, and a lot of taxes. But of course, an essential need in Australia is housing, and I think we need to. I think Australians have gotten to the point where they're like, okay, we need to be prioritised over that. Reform property taxation, gradually phase down negative gearing capital gains, replace stamp duty with some sort of land tax, encourage institutional investors build to rent through tax settings rather than mum and dad's local mum and dad's holding multiple underused properties. Okay. So this is interesting. So like finding that negative gearing capital gains discounts is below migration and also below underutilized dwellings is interesting to me. And then encouraging institutional investors to build to rent. So that's where you're going to have your superannuation, your big super banks and all that sort of stuff investing in, these build to rent investment properties, like apartments and townhouses and stuff like that too. I just thought this would have been up here with number one, but apparently not. Improve zoning and supply pipelines. So streamline planning approvals for medium density housings, mandate state targets for new homes, expand social affordable housing stock with direct government build programs, new building manners, but it's slow long term. So this is to deal with the long term capacity. Okay, I think that's kind of obvious. So priority order for impact, vacant homes, Airbnb, and downsizing. Okay, so these are the incentives, the downsizing incentives, tighten up on Airbnb, and also start taxing those people who have vacant homes for more than 6 months. Migration aligned with housing capacity. Start, adjusting your net overseas migration with the amount of homes that are being built. And I think it's the same around trying to incentivize them to fill up their regional stock, the stock that's basically around the suburbs and that sort of stuff too. Tax reform, negative gearing, capital gains tax, that sort of stuff, and then zoning supply programs. So it even says here, if Australia did even 1 and 2 together, the housing market would see noticeable relief in rents and availability within 12 to 24 months. So let's just say the government started doing it now. Before they finish their term, they would be having a huge effect on this. And then they could get re-elected for, 28 to 30. Sorry, 27 to 29. Yeah, whatever. So, yeah, because they're going to come, 26, 27, 28, far out my maths today. Yeah, so it'd be 28 to 30. 35. All right, keep going on. Like, I don't understand why, man, that would solve so much just through this one plan alone. We need PM chat in here. I think he's ticking some boxes. Let me know if you agree. Like this could all just be, the Chinese trying to influence our government and housing stock. But this all it sounds legit. And I prompted ChatGPT at the start only to use data from ABS. It sort of said keeps saying it has, but So here it says, would you like me to sketch a policy impact versus difficult matrix? Quick wins versus hard reforms, so you can visually see what's realistic for government action. I said, sure. So from this graph here, we see policy impacts versus difficulty matrix for Australian housing reform. So we see at the x-axis is the difficulty to implement, and on the y-axis we see impact to the housing crisis. So as we go for the easiest, right, at 3, and the impact it would have, we have the easiest and making a 6 out of 10 on the impact scale. We have downsizing incentives. So it'd be the easiest, but not have the best impact, that's for sure. Next, we have Airbnb short-term rental caps. Now, remember, these two alone were on that number 1. So they are the easiest. And we have a 6 and a 7 out of 10 for the impact that it would have for Australian housing, affordability, accessibility. So already that could have a huge impact, right? Like collectively, like together. Okay. Now when we look at what's if we go up a difficulty, we look at vacant property tax. So these three alone, and that has an 8. So ChatGPT seems to think that the vacant property tax could have a very, very good impact on the housing market. And then we look at those 3. This is difficulty out of 10. We've got 2 3s and a 4. This is how easy the difficulty of implementation. So this could have a very, very good effect. Then we looked up to the 6. We've got building social and affordable housing with a 6 on the impact. So it's harder than downsizing incentives, but according to this, would have the same impact. Now that is interesting. Just as difficult, align migration with housing, and this is saying it would have one of the top impacts to the housing situation. Very interesting. So this is probably where a lot of people, this argument point here is probably what the March for Australia and all the anti-immigration rallies is trying to target, this point here. Okay? And you could probably argue that if this was a good one to tackle, would this be more beneficial than these 3 alone? Maybe these 2 alone, maybe these 2 alone. I think it's obvious that it would have more than downsizing incentives, but it's a lot harder to implement. Okay? Zoning reform and medium density. So now we're up to 7. So zoning reform, medium density, that's for your long term. I think that's going to be fine. That's just general sort of growth of housing. Replace stamp duty with land tax. That is going to have an 8 impact, a stronger impact on the housing situation, but it's also quite hard to implement. And then lastly, the hardest to implement, but also having one of them having the highest impact on housing is phasing out negative gearing capital gains tax. Now, I would say that is quite hard to implement because of all the wealthy people the government would have to put up with, including themselves, when implementing those kind of incentives. So, yeah, I think going down this route is probably not going to be the easiest. If we want to have a quick effect, I think these 3 here probably would, according to ChatGPT, have the best outcome. So why are capital gains tax and negative gearing changes so difficult? Huge numbers of vested interests. Around 2.2 million Australians own investment property. I have an investment property, just one. I'm not that rich, not rich in the slightest at all. It's a very cheap investment property, but I rent it out, and the people I rent it out to are, it's a young couple, so it's helping them. They get to live close by, and they're a young couple, so probably if they were to buy a house together, it's a little bit too soon, maybe, but who knows? But people do want to rent at the end of the day, so I think it's okay. 2.2 million Australians own investment property. Negative gearing, the negative gearing for me, it's really not that good. I think it accumulates with the more that you have. And it's a large voting block. So trying to actually get people to actually get on board, you're probably going to go up against 2.2 million Australians that are going to basically vote against you if you start making those changes. So that makes sense. Middle Australia perception, although wealthy investors claim to have most of the benefits reformed, but it's often framed as hurting mum and dad investors. So I would agree with that. I'd say that the negative gearing, people who probably support not introducing negative gearing capital gains tax, they're trying to point the needle, saying like, oh, these are the people like me are the ones that you're going to hurt the most, and you're also going to hurt your the other middle class people who have investment properties. Which I think at the end of the day, with the crisis that we're in, I still think that you should, it is an essential need to have a house over your head. So I think the Australian government should be doing everything it can to help that. And if that means that I don't get an investment property, then so be it. That's just how it is. Politically, this creates a scare campaign that reform. Yeah, so they're trying to frame it in a way that's going to hurt the middle class rather than it's going to damage the wealthy class. Middle class will probably they'll probably just take the profits or whatever, and they'll just do something else with it. It's not really going to impact their overall financial state, but for the wealthy, it'll drastically impact them. Fear of house pricing collapse, because there'll just be a whole lot of stock that goes in the market. History of failed reform attempts. Labor apparently lost their election just due to introducing the thought of negative gearing and halving the capital gains discount. And since then, no one's wanted to touch it. You've seen Albo being pressured on it before, and Jim Chalmers, and it's people kick up about it very, 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 very quickly. Intergeneration politics. Older Australians have multiple properties, are protected. So grandfather existing arrangements. So, older Australians who own multiple properties are protected. So, for some people it is exempt. Younger Australians want reforms to make housing affordable, but they are smaller, less powerful. So the younger Gen Z people who are struggling aren't voting. But that is on the rise. I've done a video on that before. Revenue versus optics. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Oh, all right. That is it. So from all that, you tell me what you think about what Prime Minister ChatGPT has come out with thinking of the best way to solve the housing crisis. I think from that, kind of touching on the original sort of claim or the original sort of talking point around, net overseas migration and the anti-immigration policy and stuff like that. After reading all this, it doesn't really sound like anti-immigration policies are going to have, like, when I say anti-immigration policies, I mean like huge changes are going to have the effect that people probably want. Now, I think people are going to like March for Australia and are kicking up about overseas migration just because they're not getting homes and they're seeing the effect it's having on the market and housing affordability. Now, I think you could introduce some anti-immigration policies that would help ease housing affordability and accessibility. But I do think that the trying to tackle the utilization of stock is a much better way. And I think that is kind of where I'm going to continue to look into and use as debate points. I don't think that going as hard on immigration as Australia is currently, or what it looks like Australia is doing, is having a positive effect on trying to get the message across around trying to get people into homes. That's my take. Let me know what you think. I'm going to move on. So thanks if you stuck it out this long. It's like been an hour, so almost an hour. So let me know what you think. I really want to know what you think. And if you haven't liked or subscribed to my channel, do that now. Do it now. And follow along with what we're learning here.